Hi, thanks for joining me again. This is the US Futures weekly chart analysis for the week ending 15th of July 2022. First chart is the daily chart of the US dollar index. I started with this because for those of you who actually like looking at the charting principles, on the daily chart you can see a really nice example of bullish absorption. The principles that denote bullish absorption are a pressing nature to the upside, a clustering of closes, which is representing absorption, and threatening down bars, which don't see any downside follow through. This is a good example of what I call bullish absorption. Okay, now the weekly chart. You can see the weekly chart spread narrowed this week on an increase in volume. The close was mid-bar. So some supply has been drawn out this week. I was expecting a test bar this week, at least early in the week, and then perhaps a push higher, but momentum was strong enough to keep price moving higher, at least initially, and some supply has been drawn out off the top. So perhaps this week we'll get a test for supply. It looks like it's well overdue. We'll get a test for supply at least early in the week, and then if supply is found to be low, price can then attempt to accelerate higher again. And if price is not found to be low, you might find that there's an absorption bar or an attempt to absorb for most of the week next week, because with spread narrowing, volume increasing to above average, the odds are that supply is being drawn out at the moment, and markets rarely continue higher sustainably when supply is being drawn out. The market will generally follow the path of least resistance, and if there's supply being drawn out, it will generally move lower to some degree. So expect a test for supply early next week, and then a response later in the week, depending on how much supply continues to be drawn out. Next chart's the E-mini, the S&P 500 futures. This is the index futures. Now you can see this week price traded within the range of the previous bar pretty much all week. Little drop out the bottom, but not much. Volume increased to average, and price is trading within this range for the last 5 weeks. Strength is being built up within this range at the moment. I'm expecting there to be increased supply drawn out of this area just above. So when, or if and when price attempts to break out, I'm expecting it will meet some supply. Price could, if things don't go well, break down, in which case anything that's been accumulated within this zone would likely be dumped and price would accelerate lower, likely with an increased spread and very high volume. So there's a build-up of buying within this bar, absorption, accumulation, and if the US dollar does come down a little bit, especially if it tests for supply early, it might offer the opportunity for this market to make an attempt to push higher. If the US dollar continues to surge higher, anything accumulated within this range may be dumped and price will accelerate lower. So it's going to be interesting the next little bit. Let's see what happens. The US Treasury 10-year note futures are trading in a little range at the moment. For me, towards the upside, this 120 line is the interesting level to keep an eye on, and below it, the 117, you can see that buying support came in at this level here, price pushed up, it didn't have the strength, or there was no real serious attempt to break above the 120 level, and price is comfortably moving within this little range. this week's bar, price moved higher on an increase in volume, although it was below average overall, but spread was narrow, so supply was likely being drawn out on an increase in volume. Look at how much spread there was the week before on lower volume. Spread reduced as price tried to move higher. That means that there was supply being drawn out, pushing the spread down, making it hard for price to go higher on the increase in volume. I would suggest that sideways is the most likely response next week, or lower. It's going to be difficult, I think, for price to move higher under those circumstances. Copper is the next chart. Copper price futures. You can see there was an attempt to support the market last week or 2 weeks back, and that attempt failed this week with price moving lower. And I think the $3 level has previously held a bit more support, and you might find that price moves towards it. I guess this bar could form a reversal of some description, like this. With the close here forming the high. That would make some sense, but at the moment you're only speculating. It's hard to know exactly what's going to happen. The $3 level will have a bit of a magnet pulling it down. Seeing there was an attempt to support the market here, and it doesn't look as though the volume from that bar has been dumped into this bar, otherwise you would have expected the volume to be higher this week. So it may be that what buying there was 2 weeks ago remains held, and this may allow for this bar to reverse next week, especially if the US dollar does come back and test for supply. We'll just have to wait and see what emerges. There's a bit of push me pull you in this market. Gold price futures. Gold price futures saw spread narrow considerably this week on a large increase in volume. This was buying coming into the market, pretty much no doubt about it. There was buying come in, the market was letting price come to them. They weren't buying the market up, they were letting price come to them. There was previous support at the 1700 level. You can see that price has broken down below all the levels of support that I was anticipating, but there is support no doubt at the 1700 level, and spread narrowed and volume increased considerably this week to high. So I would suggest there's been an attempt to support the market this week. We'll just have to see what the response is. Also remember that if there's buying like this and the market does continue lower, it will be dumped. The professionals won't be committed to these positions at this point, and if anything goes wrong, they won't hesitate to dump. That means that all of this volume will be dumped, which includes what gets drawn out as price moves lower, and you get a really high volume, widespread down bar. So just because there's buying in the market doesn't mean there will be a response. This is probably speculative support in anticipation. So we'll just have to wait and see how the market responds here. But there has been an attempt to support the market, no doubt. Silver price futures. You can see the silver price futures broke down here, drifted lower. But this week, spread, it's about average. The close in the middle on the increase in volume suggests there is some buying support in the market. I think there's been previous support at the $18 level. In fact, let's have a quick look. See this high volume here? Corresponds to this bar. You can see how this was effectively a breakout line for this little period. Price broke out here, and it's caught this week's close almost perfectly. you'll find that there is support within this zone, or previous support within this zone, around the 17, 18. That's 17, 18 and a half, 17 and a half to 18 particularly, right down to here effectively. This higher level here is what I was really looking at. So yes, there was a little buying support. You can see that volume was back to average with a mid-bar close. It wasn't particularly strong buying support, but being about average volume always suggests there's no shenanigans in the market. It was serious. What happened did happen. So there was moderate buying support in this market this week. Light crude, energy futures. See price move lower this week. Here's effectively where I would place the lows of this range. Price moved lower. Volume was above average, just. Prices closed well off its low to about mid-bar. And while price is drifting lower, each bar shows buying support in the bottom. So there is sufficient buying support to continue absorbing the supply drawn out from the sellers. There's enough buyers in the market to keep holding up this market above the lows of the range. Whether that continues into the future, we'll have to wait and see, but it does suggest that there is sufficient buying support in the market to absorb the sellers at the moment. And really the last two bars, you can see this week's bar has closed within the range of the previous bar. The last two bars on the increase in volume really do look like supports coming in. So I won't be surprised to see price attempt to move higher again in response. The Aussie dollar currency futures, which have effectively broken down below the important 70 cents level, and price is trying to hold on at the 68 level. It's only modest support previously been found at this level, but there is support there, or previous support there. There's stronger support at 65, stronger previous support. We'll just have to see how the market fares at 68. You can see it's trying to hold on. It's doing a pretty good job really. It's closed well off its lows this week on an increase in volume. So buying support has come in. Whether it can be maintained at this level, we'll see. It's looking vulnerable, there's no doubt. And you may see 65 in the end. But it's trying to hold on. Last chart is Bitcoin futures. Bitcoin futures broke down back here on this bar, and since have broken down further. There was an attempt to support the market and absorb supply here, which was dumped in this bar. What I mentioned earlier about the market dumping, you can see what was bought in this little zone where absorption was taking place was dumped into this bar. It was a widespread bar on an increase in volume. So the majority of what was bought here was dumped into this bar. It's reflected in this high volume, and now price is attempting to support and absorb around this 20,000 level. And on previous support, there is a level between 16,000 and 20,000. So this is the support zone here, and if that can't hold, it really has to move down towards the 10 and 12,000, 8,000 level where stronger support resides. But it's doing a good job at the moment. It's sitting right on top of this 20,000 line, and previous support goes down to the 16,000 level. So stick with that at the moment. It's looking like it's trying to support. This week saw an increase in volume to average, and effectively it was a test for supply, but with the higher volume, it's not an effective test, which means it's probably not going to push higher in response. It was an absorption bar. The market was absorbing the supply being drawn out and maintaining its price level around the 20,000, which is a good result really. I would expect this market will continue to trade sideways around the 20,000 before it attempts to move higher. And if the market continues to move lower, expect another one of these widespread down bars, another breakdown bar similar to this one in response. Back to the US dollar index. I'm expecting a test for supply early next week. I was expecting it last week too, after this bar saw price accelerate higher and break out like that. Generally, there's a test bar in response to consolidate, absorb supply and solidify the gains, but momentum was strong enough to continue higher. Although you can see the close off this week's high suggests that supply was drawn out. Volume increased further, spread narrowed. Almost certainly I would expect some sort of test for supply next week, and if it's successful it'll look like that early in the week, and that would allow price to accelerate higher. If supply continues to be drawn out, price may have to come back a little more deeply to challenge the sellers and absorb supply a little lower, perhaps down around this level, just below the lows of this week's bar. Okay, that's my lot for the week. Hopefully that was worth your while watching. Thanks again. See ya.